this opportunity tonight to dive in on some of the best learnings I've taken out of the last 3 years. And I say that because you'll understand more of the story as I go along, just because it has been a journey through diagnosis of cancer through the end of my mom's life and beyond that has really started to shape my understanding of living life to its fullest, as well as dying with dignity. So these things that we're going to talk about tonight probably aren't on everybody's let's have casual conversation around the table conversation or topics, but I'm really, really grateful for just the resources that I'm going to put before you tonight. And there will be opportunity. This will be loaded onto YouTube, and there will be opportunity for you to check the show notes for links and things like that so that you can get connected to the work that's going on. Some of you may know that I'm an essential oil enthusiast. I actually have been with Young Living for over almost, 17 years now. And I specifically have served with them as a health and business coach or independent distributor / brand partner through our family's team, Living Well Now, since 2012 actively. After I retired from my school job, I started learning more about becoming a spiritual director and coach. And I also have presented on stage at multiple events. I don't do a lot of speaking gigs now, but it is something that is a passion of mine. And I feel like the timing will be right when I'm called forth to share maybe some of this work and other things that I've been doing to help inspire and educate people on the journey as well. Jerry and I have 4 young adults together, and since November of 22, I've been deeply grieving the loss of my mom. A quick disclaimer is that under the ARS 133620, that's a mandatory reporting law. So if you do end up commenting on this video or making a note in the chat that there is harm to yourself or others, or a minor or a vulnerable child, or a vulnerable adult, then I will need to follow up with law enforcement. So just keep that in mind. Mental health is very, very crucial to this conversation. And so making sure people get the resources and help that they need is one of my first goals and priorities. In regards to Young Living essential oils, we're going to do an interactive piece at the end. Just keep in mind that our oils community was founded to help teach other families to be empowered by their own wellness journey, and then also to give them an opportunity to create income while they're doing it. But the information that we're going to go over about using essential oils to help clear blocks to our growth and healing is not intended for the treatment or prevention of disease, nor as a substitute for medical treatment or as an alternative to medical advice. So just keep that in mind as we share. So let's talk a minute about grief and grieving and the delineation that I'm making in these definitions as we get started tonight. This is Grief Basics with Angela. So I've sort of summarized the best pieces I've taken away from my learning the last few years since being confronted with my own deep grief. Some of you may remember the early work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross from like the late 60s, early 70s. Her book was on death and dying, and many tried to attach the same linear stages of that to grieving. What happened next was she has since come out and updated that earlier work with a book called On Grief and Grieving, along with the co-author David Kessler. And David Kessler is a really prolific author and resource for grief work. And he published an update to the book on Grief and Grieving called The 6th Stage, Finding Meaning. And I'll show you that in a diagram in a few slides. There was also early work done by Bowlby as well as Robert Niemeyer, who also created a meaning-making model of grief. He's a grief expert who introduced a model that focuses on meaning-making in the grieving process. And he suggests that part of the work of grieving is to actively construct a new narrative that integrates the loss into our life story. So those are all really good foundational pieces. But right after my mom passed, I was blessed to run into a woman here locally, Shea, Darian, who has even deepened my understanding of grief and grieving more. She says grief is grieving is defined as responding internally and externally to a grief-inducing loss of some kind, while grief can be defined as an involuntary, spontaneous, and multidimensional internal state of distress, catalyzed by a real or even a perceived loss of someone or something valued or cherished. So do keep that in mind as we're talking about this conversation tonight. And for some of you, this may be review, but it may be some really helpful summaries that that you didn't realize you needed. There are three combinations of grief then, according to Brené Brown in her Atlas of the Heart. If you have not picked up that resource, there's some really good definitions and explanations that Brené gives based on her qualitative research of interviewing people who just in the course of her posit about shame and vulnerability. And so out of those conversations, she said there were three foundational elements of grief from her research. The first one was loss, as I mentioned in Shea's definition as well. And this is death and separation as tangible losses. However, it is also the loss of normality. So what could be, or what we thought we knew or understood about someone or something. So we can experience a foundational grief loss. We can also experience longing, which is that involuntary yearning for wholeness, for understanding, for meaning, for the opportunity to regain or even simply touch what we've lost. And those two, I think in particular, where a lot of the work I've been doing at Compassionate Women's Retreat and through Soul Care Sanctuary have really landed, because I think for many women, we have a vision of what our lives could look like and should look like, and yet we find ourselves stuck sometimes or trapped in narratives that that feel very bitter and very hard, and maybe not like we planned or what we dreamed of. The last one is the idea of, or the foundation of, feeling lost. The more difficult it is to articulate our experiences of grieving, or if the world around us urges us to get over it, we can feel really lost in the process, and to our detriment, feel completely stuck. And I did go ahead and put a QR code here that you can use with your phone if you're watching this on your computer. But I'll link this in the show notes as well. And that is a what was used to be called complicated grief, now has been shifted based on the research from Columbia. And that is now prolongedgrief.columbia.edu. And that's not just about prolong, it's also about the intensive and pervasive grief that sidelines almost everything else in everyday life for a period far longer than is expected by a bereaved person and their friends and family, that may require professional grief therapy. Now, that's not to say that there is a timeline on grief. It just means that you have an inability to prosper or to function because of the depressive feelings or whatever accompanies the really difficult times of getting out of your grief. That can happen immediately during that time of acute grief. It can also take place as life goes on, disrupting your everyday life for longer than a year. I also just want to share this quote from David Kessler. I thought it was really powerful to speak these words out loud, and maybe you needed to hear them tonight. Each person's grief is as unique as their fingerprint, but what everyone else has in common is that no matter how they grieve, they share a need for their grief to be witnessed. That doesn't mean needing someone to try to lessen it or reframe it for them. The need is for someone to be fully present to the magnitude of the loss without trying to point out the silver lining. And I've come to refer to those not helpful phrases as platitudes. Maybe you've heard that before as well. And I'd love for you, if you are commenting or in the chat, I'd love for you to share those things that people have said to you that are intended to make you feel better, but maybe hurt your feelings instead, or create kind of angst for you. I also want to note that disenfranchised or suffocating grief is the work of Tahel Border. And she is a researcher out of the University of Missouri, who Brené, I hadn't been familiar with her work, but Brené cited her work in the Atlas of the Heart. And this is suffocating grief, the kind of grief that comes out of her research was mainly done with sexual abuse victims. And so that idea, even long-term racist abuse or homicides that go unsolved, right? Those kinds of things, the suffocating grief where people don't think you should still feel grief about certain things. I do like that there's a movement, if you will, about how to handle that kind of grief as well, because that's kind of in a category of its own. Yeah, so I see some of you in the chat writing about time heals all wounds, or it takes time. Yeah, just be patient. God's not finished with you yet. I mean, I think a lot of times our Christian friends in particular try to be super spiritual and religious and help us remember and regain our faith when we've lost it. And yet sometimes we just need to be told it's okay to miss the person, or it's okay to miss the way things used to be and the simplicity of children in elementary school, as opposed to, adults making their way in the world and making decisions that we feel, challenged by or whatever it may be. So just to give you a little bit more of a picture of Shea's work, and this is from her book, Doing Grief in Real Life, which is based on an academic article that she published in 2014. The book is newer than that, but she says, unlike traditional grief support programs that focus solely on talking cures through grief counseling and attending support groups after a loss occurs, Doing Grief offers programs and services with a more lasting impact. And we teach adaptive grieving as a life skill that a person can develop and rely upon over the course of a lifetime. So again, if you're not somebody who's experiencing depressive feelings or feelings of suffocating loss or loss that or shift or transition that is paralyzing to you, these are adaptive grief responses that you can implement right away so that you can, with the ebb and flow, because we live in life, we know we're going to experience grief again and again. You can share and take confidence in your ability to handle or weather the storms that come upon you. And you can find more at her website, doinggrief.org as well. And that's from Shea, Darian. I also want to broaden the scope and just speak these things out loud because they may be grief experiences that you hadn't considered. The first one is the idea that passages of loss, death, and change. So broken relationships can be grief striking through divorce, betrayal, or conflict, illness or injury, sudden loss of belongings, beliefs, or cherished daily rhythms and routines, experiencing injustice, disappointment, loneliness, shame, or failure may be for some grievers a death worse than death. So again, maybe you hadn't thought about the transitions that you've experienced in your life as being triggers for or catalysts for grief. But this illusionary great divide between living and dying is filled with all sorts of life-altering changes that breed grief. So keep that in mind as you are considering who this information is for. And I think you'll see that based upon that definition, we all have things to learn, shall we say. This is a quick diagram I said of the old model. In 1969, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross identified the stages of dying in her transformative book on death and dying. Decades later, she and David Kessler wrote the classic on grief and grieving, introducing the stages of grief with the same transformative pragmatism and compassion. So again, starting with denial, moving toward anger, depression, bargaining, making kind of plans to be able to, once I do this, then I can do that before moving to acceptance. And then I loved the second picture, which is the same model, but with a lot of twists and turns and circles and backward movement. This was never intended, Kessler says, never intended to be a linear process, based on hard-earned personal experiences as well as knowledge and wisdom earned through decades of his work, Kessler introduced a critical sixth stage, and that is meaning, or making meaning out of the grief. Many people look for closure after a loss, like somehow, tying it up with a nice little bow will kind of ensure that you won't be impacted by it again. But Kessler says when you find meaning beyond the stages of grief most of us are familiar with, that can transform grief into a more peaceful and hopeful experience. And I'm going to walk through what Shea has determined as the model of adaptive grieving responses, or what I just simply retitled the 4 grieving responses that Shea created. So, for example, lamenting. And this is experiencing and expressing grief-related pain, distress, or disheartenment. And I quickly tried to find some pictures that demonstrated this. And I'm actually crying in this photo with my brothers. We took a time together in November at my mom's first angelversary, we called it, to be together in Sedona. And so we went up to the roof of the home that we were staying in. This is just a really awesome property. If anybody ever wants to get away to Sedona, let us know. We'll send you the link. But we were just having shared time together. You can see both my brother's eyes are a little weepy as well, and I just couldn't even pull it together. So my hand is over my face in tears, because lament is usually, it doesn't have to be accompanied by tears, but it does sometimes come with it, right? The lament of what we've lost, or what was and now is, kind of coming to terms or coming to grips with that. And it can be triggered by different things, right? I mean, this was her angelversary, as opposed to maybe a smell that you sense, or a special recipe, or a flavor, or something that you see that reminds you of them, that causes lament and sadness from the very core of who you are. Heartening is the next type, or next, it's not a stage, but she calls it an adaptive grieving model. So this is the next adaptive type, and that is heartening. And that is when you can experience and express what is comforting, uplifting, or even surprisingly pleasurable in the grieving process. So think about things that make you grateful for who the person was in your life, or the situation, or the time that you shared. And the picture was, again, in Sedona. We're a little bit more silly in this photo, all jumping as we were together on a on a hike, and found this great photo with Bell Rock in the background, and Courthouse Butte. So really fun to see us jumping for joy, right? And that's as a heartening experience from the same weekend, but a different way that we were experiencing mom's memory, and the heartening of the enjoyment together. She loved to hike in Sedona. Integrating is kind of what Kessler and Niemeyer have both kind of resolved at the end of their research, or the current state of their research. Integrating is then when you can attend the life-shifting changes that are brought on by a grief-striking loss, and start to incorporate those changes into everyday life. So integrating means taking on just the meaning of what their life meant to you. So a lot of times, if somebody maybe dies tragically by the hands of a drunk driver, a person will commit to being part of an organization that helps more people stay sober, or gives free Uber rides to college students after 2 a.m. or whatever the cause might be. But these are the things that we do to integrate the shift and what we've experienced into our current lives. So a couple of photos from our first Compassionate Women's Retreat in Carlsbad is an example of how I've chosen to integrate my mom's memory along with an honoring process for women to come together and begin unpacking some of their own journeys, so that they can come out more full and strong based on the experience. And then last but not least is tempering. And I feel like one of the reasons I love this adaptive model is because you can literally, within an hour's time, find yourself in using all 4 models of adaptive grieving, especially as you become more fluid in understanding and knowing about them. But this is literally taking a break from grief. So making a decision to pull out of the hard times that you're in, and instead of and instead of kind of facing your grief head on, find ways to numb them, so to speak, just because you need a break from the overwhelm and distress that sometimes grievers feel physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And I think about, the picture is not from about this, but I think about when I was going through my divorce, how I clung to my girlfriends for happy hours and hikes and weekend trips and things like that. Those were all examples of tempering during that time to help nourish my soul and my spirit while I was going through a really tough time. And the pictures I'm showing, these don't really go together, but you notice I'm holding a drink in each of them. One is my mom and I love to share coffee together. So that's her on the right with me. And those, you know, again, while she was going through her cancer diagnosis, we looked for ways to just not even think about it. So a lot of times we were just walking the beach and drinking coffee. And the picture on the left was just taken a couple weeks ago when I was in Sedona honoring my mom on her birthday by drinking an espresso martini at her favorite restaurant, Mariposa. And I share this picture because obviously when used with, how shall we say, true sort of care, drugs and alcohol and, you know, other addictive things can be a help to tempering our grief, but it doesn't mean that it goes away just because we've avoided it for a period of time. And so I really have, I feel like in the last year, now it'll be 2 years since my mom died. I feel like in this last year, I've started to understand tempering differently. And tempering sometimes just looks like not talking about it for a while and just zoning out to a TV show, right? And just finding something else to focus on. I also share this photo along with this quote, one of the books, and I wanted to give you a couple of resources that you can turn to as well if you're a reader like I am or a podcast listener. There's lots of options that are out there. But Susan Cain wrote a book called Bittersweet. How sorrow and longing make us whole. And I actually listened to it while my mom was diagnosed and going through while she was going through radiation treatment and then doing a lot of holistic treatments for her continued health. They had basically told her that there was no cure for the diagnosed type of lung cancer that she had. And so it was just about keeping her comfortable. She never I think I can say in full faith that my mom never experienced pain or a lot of suffering in what she walked through, but she didn't leave our presence on earth, and that was a really shattering time for us because we truly believed that that she would get through it. And so one of the things I really liked about what I read and what I understood from Susan's work in holding the bitter alongside the sweet is that the book is about that melancholic direction. Like so many times we can be all kittens and rainbows and unicorns, am I right? And we can think, oh, the sun will come out tomorrow and oh, won't it be great when this is over? And how well are we embracing the melancholy, a tendency to the state of longing, poignancy, and sorrow, an acute awareness of passing time, and a curiously piercing joy at the beauty of the world. The bittersweet is also about the recognition that light and dark, birth and death, bitter and sweet are forever paired. Days of honey, days of onion, as an Arabic proverb puts it. I've also heard in my year or two since my mom passed, people using grief and gratitude as those recognition of bittersweet. We hold the grief with the gratitude. Like, I'm so grateful that I have these memories with my mom. And one of the things my brother interviewed me in a podcast recently. I'll leave this up here for that. He interviewed me in a podcast recently and said, and one of the things that came out that he quoted me on was how grateful I am that my mom that my mom's diagnosis for 16 months didn't interfere with my work directly. I was still able to show up for a lot of what she needed during that time. And I have really no regrets about how we walked her into heaven. And so I'm very, very grateful for the bittersweet nature of that. And that was a really important and a pivotal book for me because I am such a positive Pollyanna that it was really important for me to understand another way of looking at something that's really hard, which is the bitter. And the other book I would highly, highly recommend is The Five Invitations by Frank Ostaseski or Ostaseski. He is a Zen, uh, he's a Buddhist, and he opened up the Zen Hospice Project in that was up in Northern California, especially during time of AIDS. The Zen Hospice Project. He also founded the Metta Institute, and he's a Buddhist teacher. So if you think about like what I'm putting before you, not a lot of Christian resources yet, but understanding, I have that. I had the Christian understanding, right? I had the heaven and hell conversations. I knew from my upbringing what it meant to die as a believer. And so it didn't feel necessary for me to read more stories about miracles or near-death experiences based on what other Christians thought. I wanted to soak in, and this was all while my mom was diagnosed before she passed. I wanted to soak in what it was like to learn from others about how to embrace death, because I also hadn't seen that very well modeled in the people that I was around. So Frank actually says, death is not waiting for us at the end of a long road. Death is always with us in the marrow of every passing moment. She's a secret teacher hiding in plain sight, and she helps us to discover what matters most. And so how this encounter through my mom's diagnosis and death has taught me to be in touch with my own mortality is for another conversation. But I did want to put forth to you the 5 invitations that I found really helpful in understanding what was going to happen as she got weaker in her fight against cancer. And that is not to wait, to welcome everything, to push away nothing. Sorry, welcome everything and push away nothing go together, as well as bring your whole self to the experience. And that was what I said earlier about being present with her, finding a place of rest, even in the middle of things, and cultivating a don't know mind. So this idea that we can embrace death's lessons was really profound to me, and really guided my understanding as she grew weaker, like I said. All right, so let's go on. The third book let's see, we've done Doing Grief, we've done Bittersweet, we've done 5 Invitations. So the third book I want to put before you is based on a quote that I shared with Aaron during our podcast. It said, it was about being hard and still saying yes, and still being able to do it, and still coming out on the other side healthy, strong, and more self-aware than when I went in. And part of that is due to my mom's love and care and her insistence that we learn all the things that we could learn together. She often said, I'm a lifelong learner and I never want to give up learning. And I'm kind of in the same boat. And so she and I both had studied from Kristin, Neff, another Buddhist, the idea of self-compassion. And this is the proven power of being kind to yourself. And that is, self-compassion means being kind and understanding to ourselves when we suffer, fail, or feel inadequate, rather than ignoring our pain or flagellating ourselves with self-criticism. Can you be warm and also supportive when confronted with the imperfection of life? Also, can you understand that self-compassion is rooted in our common humanity, things that we share in common with others, rather than the distancing phenomena that pushes us apart. When we struggle or make mistakes, there's often an irrational but pervasive sense of isolation, as if I were the only person in the world having this painful experiences. However, all humans suffer, not the same way or the same amount, but the very definition of being human means being vulnerable, flawed, and imperfect. Can we hold that grace when we are scrolling Facebook, for example, during a really tough political season? Can we focus on what we share in the hard times rather than the divisive and almost alienating way that we speak or pass along misinformation? And last but not least is our mindfulness, and especially as it comes to kind of couching our understanding of our healing journey and grief. Self-compassion requires taking a balanced, mindful approach to our suffering so that we neither suppress nor exaggerate it. So can you not over-identify that you are this way? For example, my mom never referred to her fight against cancer as a fight against cancer. She said, I'm creating healthy cells. I'm releasing unhealthy cells. And she even very rarely would use the word cancer. So self-compassion means being mindful with the words that we choose, as well as how we look at things, and turning toward our pain with acceptance of the present moment. And that's similar to some of what I read in Frank's book as well, obviously, since they're both from a Buddhist standpoint. But that idea that when we can just welcome everything and push away nothing and just receive it as a part of our mindfulness, we can be so much more gentle with ourselves. That was another phrase my mom used a lot: be gentle with yourself. I also have a huge amount, and I'm going to share some of these titles with you real quickly. I have a huge amount of meditation and prayer books that I turn to, not to read cover to cover, but to consult during my time of meditation and prayer. And of course, using worship music out of my Judeo-Christian understanding of who God is. One of them is called To Light Their Way. And I've had this for a while. This is from Kayla Craig, and it's specifically a collection of prayers and liturgies for parents. But I find them to be really helpful. And in light of yesterday's violent shooting in Georgia, there's actually a prayer in here for families that are impacted, whether you were there or not. How do you hold up? How do you hold up a family that is suffering because of gun violence? Maybe a prayer for parents who parent alone. There's also prayers for different parts of the time of year, as well as moving, getting married, that kind of thing. So I love having those on hand. I would also highly recommend Jodie Byrne's Praying the Scriptures for Your Teens, as well as these 3 books that I picked up based on who I follow on Instagram. This is Priscilla Shirer's book, Fervent, which is all about a woman's battle for serious, specific, and strategic prayer, which was featured in a movie in the last few years. And then 2 other books you may not be familiar with. This one is actually by Cole Arthur Riley, and it's called Black Liturgies, Prayers, Poems, and Meditations for Staying Human. So that part where we talked about recognizing each person's God-given right to beauty and peace and order and freedom. That's a really great book of liturgy, as well as Elle, who wrote How We Heal. And this is based on some of her lived experience as well. Uncovering Your Power and Setting Yourself Free. There are prayers and breath prayers kind of put in the middle of her story there. Oops, let me go back to sharing this. My mom would also say, again, like I said, be gentle with yourself, but she would also talk a little bit about building resilience and having just the right amount of patience, and tenacity is the other word that she used a lot. And Brené Brown's quote is that joy collected over time fuels resilience. So where are the times and places that you're holding on to that bring you joy? Is it in a retreat with other women? Is it in a special vacation shared with your family? Is it found just in your quiet space or time in your home, or places where you can sort of strengthen yourself for the journey? There are 5 common factors of resilient people, and like I said, I'll dive into this on another talk because I think it's powerful enough to share in a different time. Number 1, they're resourceful and have good problem-solving skills. Number 2, they're more likely to seek help if they need it and ask for it. 3, they hold the belief that they can do something that will help them to manage feelings and to cope. And 4, they have social support available to them. And that's one of the reasons I really love coming together on the first Thursday for sanctuary share time, as well as the 2 Mondays for Care Circle that we do for our soul care sanctuary folks, because I really, really believe the more we can reach out to our social support, the better. And last but not least, to be connected to others. So almost the same kind of thing, but family and friends, and how you're teaching your family and friends to show up for you in ways that are meaningful and important to you. I threw a QR code on here in case you wanted to download the soul care kit. You can come be part of our membership group for free. You don't have to upgrade your account to include the Care Circle times. So I wanted to make sure you had the invitation to join for free. Like I said, it'll be in the show notes as well. But it's really important to me that you know that all those resources that I just went over tonight are printed for you in the Soul Care Kit. So if you haven't downloaded the 2024 Soul Care Kit, there is a page added about grief resources. So I invite you to download that at your earliest convenience. And that's located in the resources section on our Heartbeat app. I really am trying to stay off of Facebook as much as possible and give us a space, a neutral space with which to grow our community. Well, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and just thank you all for being part of this first session tonight. I know we're going to end with a really valuable piece of learning, kind of taking what we've just kind of unpacked about basics of grief and start to really look at what do we need most in our lives to create action out of what we've just learned or something else that we're bringing to the table tonight. This is called Aroma Boost, but just as a way of sort of shifting the time between the two, I'd love to know in the chat or in the comments, what are the things, because I am live streaming this on Facebook as well. I'd love to know some of the things that stood out to you the most about your own grief journey, where you saw yourself reflected, and where you might have some growth edges that you want to sort of work through together. I'm really, really glad that that you all are participating tonight. Whoa, I just realized I can do this screen. Is that cool? Can you see me and the presentation? Love that. This is some new stuff. Yeah, grieving in real time. Super great. Yep, yep. And awful all at the same time. There's that bitter and that sweet, for sure. So our aroma boost tonight is going to be all about using the essential oils to shift your immediate reactions to things that you're facing in your life. Just a reminder that this work originates from Dr. Benjamin Purkis, who's a clinical psychologist who's still active online with his practice, and you can actually schedule with him for aroma freedom sessions and or training practitioner level things as well. But what would you say is your biggest roadblock at the moment? Maybe roadblock to success, maybe roadblock to sleeping well, maybe biggest roadblock to your grief journey, to understanding all of these things. I used a quote from bell hooks there in the corner, like a stain on our clothes. It marks us as flawed, imperfect. To cling to grief, to desire its expression is to be out of sync with modern life, where the hip do not get bogged down in mourning. And we sometimes feel shame about grief that lingers. Maybe that's part of your roadblock, other people's expectations. But we're going to start with identifying whatever situation seems to be overwhelming. This is just a quick aroma reset that we're going to do tonight, and then we'll have some action orientation out of it. And then we'll be complete with our session for tonight. So name the situation that is most overwhelming, frustrating, or confusing. You can make little notes to me, or you can make them to yourself in a journal or on a piece of paper. And then name the feeling. Give one word that describes how you feel about the situation. Number three, locate this feeling in your body. It can either be a sensation or posture. And then what's the negative thought that you hear in your mind's eye or that you're saying out loud to yourself? I'm never going to get over this. This is too hard. There will never be a good answer. Next, take your oils, and remember, one of the best blends is lavender, frankincense, and stress away. It's not a blend, it's a mix. So you take 1 drop each, lavender, stress away, and frankincense, rub it between your hands, cup your hands over your nose and mouth, and then just breathe in. As you breathe in, pay attention to what shifts in your body. Even just the act of inhaling for the count of 4, holding for the count of 4, and exhaling can bring such peace and relief. In step 6, it says decide what is next. So let's repeat the steps one more time together. What's happening in the situation? Is it the same situation, or is there something else that draws your attention? Maybe unrelated, but still impactful in a negative way. Then name that feeling. One word to describe how you feel about the situation. Locate that feeling in your body. Identify the negative thought. And then either use that same blend again or pull out your release oil. Such a powerful blend for really shifting emotions from being stuck to moving through. You're searching for clarity in your mind's eye. You're opening to growth. You're releasing old patterns and triggers and automatic reactions that don't serve you in this moment. And you're allowing those old messages to be replaced with new ones, because with your essential oils, you're scrambling things in your limbic system so that you don't have to repeat history. So ask yourself, what do I do next? And write down a couple of the ideas. And consider the action that comes out of those things. Remember, it's always powerful to think in ink and to create a visual representation of what you're choosing. So if you indicated tonight in the chat that you're feeling kind of off path or misdirected or out of sorts, what can you put together that helps bring you back to your true self? Is there a word or a phrase, an affirmation of sorts that you can write? Didn't put the right picture in there. Remember, affirmations, maybe it's in the wrong order. Anyway, affirmations, action affirmations can say how you'll feel when something positive happens. So I feel joy in my heart as I get back on track with my goals this weekend. I feel gratitude in my heart as I review the month of August for my own reflection. I feel peaceful as I set a goal to get to bed an hour earlier every night, whatever it might be that'll help you in this stage. And then remember, a power pose is you standing with your hands over your heart, or in a power pose with your arms outstretched, or what we call cactus arms in Arizona yoga, or prayer pose, or Tadasana with your hands on your hips. And when you stand in that power pose for 2 minutes or more every day, you're anchoring in that new thought and belief. And you can pair it with an essential oil that brings you a sense of joy. And it could be joy, or it could be transformation, or it could be belief, or something else that just feels hearty to you and helps ground your decision. And then, of course, set up stages for yourself to celebrate milestones as well as achieve accountability. What needs to change in your daily schedule or routine? Maybe joining Soul Care Sanctuary and being part of the upcoming retreat group is part of getting back on track with a small group of accountability. And then, of course, allow for grace. C.S. Lewis once said, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. So keep in mind, tonight was the grief healing basics. On Monday and the 23rd, so the 9th and the 23rd, we'll meet in Care Circle for those of you who are a part of the paid membership. Also, those of you who are part of that group can join us on September 19th for the 60-minute breakthrough, which gives you an introduction to the aroma freedom, as well as a process of going through together as a group for aroma freedom. If you just want to buy an a la carte session, that's available as well. And the invitation is still open to those of you who are looking for a retreat away from your everyday life to come be part of the Compassionate Women's Retreat, October 24th through the 27th. We are going to kind of mix things up a little bit this time, so I'm looking forward to some fresh routines, and look forward to a new announcement of what's coming in 2025 to start off the first part of the year. Here's the QR code if you need it for our Soul Care Sanctuary. I gave it to you earlier in the session as well. It'll be in the video notes, so you can grab that there. And if you've never gotten essential oils before, let me know, or talk to the person who introduced you to Young Living, so that you can get started with these beautiful and exquisite and proprietary essential oil blends and products. Super glad everybody was able to join tonight as we elevate our journeys together, creating opportunities between our purpose, people, and the possibility that lies before us.